right, joined now by Neil Dalal covering the Washington Wizards for Hoop District and Sports Rabbi. Really appreciate you taking the time, Neil. Let's talk about the Wizards. Let's talk about a team that has unfortunately not manifested in as much of the fun, as much of the exciting basketball as we might have hoped at the beginning of the year. Uh, it's probably got to start with the defense, right? Like you don't go 3-17 without having. It really has been one of the worst defenses in the NBA.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a problem that has, troubled them for the last couple seasons. Everybody thought that, Wes Unseld Jr. coming in could kind of right that ship. They really haven't had that good of a defense, in the past 8+ years, going back to Randy Whitman. It's not been great. It's not been pretty. There are times when they're giving up 130, 140, 150 points. Kyle Kuzma put it eloquently one night that they can't even guard a stop sign sometimes. That certainly some of that is due to their starting backcourt is not going to be a defensive prowess or strength when you have limited size there. So certainly defense has been an issue. And then the nights where they're not necessarily hitting their shots, they've had a handful of those games just get pretty ugly pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's got to be frustrating. I know that for Wizards fans, a fan base that has kind of, I mean, and this is part of the process, right? I think we knew that this year would be probably a step back and that it was going to be maybe worse before it got better. But even still, like just the losing streak that the team has gone on, I know it's been interrupted like here or there by a win, but it's got to be frustrating. Let's start with Jordan Poole then. Uh, he was one of the main characters for Washington over the course of this offseason and trading for him and acquiring him. Have Wizards fans enjoyed the Jordan Poole experience so far?
Yeah, it's pretty polarizing topic point. Obviously, a lot of people, when he first arrived, was like, "Hey, we got a player who may not be that much of a step back of a Bradley Beal on a relatively much better contract." I think even though he might not necessarily admit it as much, being the focus of scouting reports night in and night out, getting double teams, getting box and ones, getting the kitchen sink thrown at you defensively, it's going to be an adjustment for a guy who was playing alongside Hall of Famers in Golden State. And so these first 20 games, especially I would say that those first 12 to 15 games, it was a rough stretch for a while. He's hopefully maybe turning a corner with his efficiency. Still has, probably a bit too many turnovers at times, but, the hope is that, okay, these next 20 games, is going to be another step in the right direction, another, means of comfortability, not just on the court, but everything off the court, just getting familiar with the team, familiar with the city. So certainly there's, a large portion of Wizards fans who have been frustrated by, the lack of defense or this, looking, rightfully so, it looks nonchalant at times. And that's rightfully so irking many people, but I think hopefully as, he continues to get himself situated with this team and gets back to some of that, razzle dazzle highlights that he was known for. Hopefully, he can start to ingratiate himself back with the majority of fans again.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does to me feel like the rest of the offense, at least with Washington, has been pretty solid. They're running at a pretty high pace, second in pace so far, fourth in assists per game, and there's some good numbers I think to be had throughout the rest of the rotation. It's just with Jordan Poole, he's going to soak up a lot of those minutes, a lot of those scoring opportunities, and everybody's got to be aligned if you're going to be an offense team. So, got to get him back on track. But has it at least been fun to watch with the rest of the offense as the team? Like, I know that it's been a track meet in a lot of these games, and the defense is hard to watch sometimes, but there have been some positive signs offensively, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, they are getting up and down the court, very quickly. One of their metrics that they look at is, when they get the ball over half court with, 20 or more seconds on the shot clock. Will Dawkins, the GM, says, their offensive efficiency is, through the roof compared to, when they're slower in that regard. It has been fun. Last night, Wednesday night, Joel Embiid dropped 50 on them, which is crazy, but at the same time, they were right up and in it until the last couple minutes. A couple things didn't go their way. free throw discrepancy was crazy, 34-8. But there have been a handful of games now, especially at home, where things are somewhat exciting, and that's what hopefully they can put forth for the fan base. Here the rest of the season. A night like yesterday against Philadelphia, even against Milwaukee, they've given them a couple good tests here and there. So hopefully that's a sign of things to come. Still not gonna rack up the wins. They're gonna fall probably pretty heavily short of their initial season win total projection of 24. But hopefully these remainder 62 games can be a lot more of these more recent close losses against pretty good contending teams, and not so much the blowouts that they started to have earlier in the season.
It wouldn't surprise me if, because the defense has gotten to the place where it has been, where everybody kind of takes a look in the mirror after this first quarter of the season and things get a little bit better. I know that everybody wants to try to play in the same direction. You don't want guys like going in different directions in the locker room, working for their own agendas, anything like that. And this team, there are enough veterans that I think you can look at it and say, yeah, there are players that are still playing for something in this league, and whether it's for auditioning for a different team, or if it's just making sure to make the best of a situation. There's I can see this team upping the pace on the wins a little bit, especially in the latter half of the year. Um, Kyle Kuzma is a guy that I'm pretty fascinated by. He has taken on additional responsibility. He's averaging more assists. He's averaging more points. What kind of steps has he taken forward? Is there leadership? Is it just the playmaking? What are you thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, looking back, to that Russell Westbrook trade that, sent Russ to LA, almost 3 years ago now. Kyle Kuzma has, absolutely been a, gem to have acquired for the Wizards. He's gotten better, pretty much every year that he's been in DC. Like you said, still early in the season, but he's averaging, 23, 6, and 5 in only, 32 minutes a game. He's playing efficiently. He's playing as somebody and using his 6'10" body, appropriately, finishing around the rim. Certainly, he has learned a lot from the likes of a LeBron James in LA and trying to come and implement, a lot of that here in DC. He, is very much trying to be like, hey, I'm trying to make 1 through 15, 1 through 18, if you include the two-way players, better, each and every day. He certainly wants to win, but understands the situation that they're in right now and says, hey, I can still, when he's on the bench and, other guys are in the game, he's still very in tune with the game, very much cheering on his teammates. That's something not everybody will do, but, he's put it perfectly. I think he said, they're cheering for me. Who am I to not cheer for them when, they're in the game? So certainly it's been a joy to watch his continued development on and off the court. And still just, 28 years old. He's about at his prime, but still could have another step or two to really go. And on a bad team like the Wizards, he's not going to make an All-Star team this year. But stats wise, he's kind of in that
Yeah.
conversation. As a fringe guy.
No, I totally agree with that. And the added pace is probably going to help in some of those actual numbers, but he has still really taken some steps. And I like to see that, where if you look in what on the outside looks like a bad situation in Washington, at least you can find these pockets of fun. At least you can find these pockets of, hey, these guys are playing well. Maybe the cohesive product isn't there, but there are elements that can be taken forward and can be moved forward. One of those is Bilal Coulibaly. I've been pretty impressed with him, and I want to hear your scouting report on the Frenchman.
Yeah, obviously rose up, the draft ranks this past year. Truly another joy to be around. He's just a very polished, mature, kind young man for just being 19. Turned 19 just a few months ago. Speaks obviously to the way he was raised. He's very much grown up in the French league as well. Learned a lot of good, useful things. He shared yesterday where one of the vets that he had there kind of taught him that, yeah, man, you can't dwell on the past. You gotta have a next play mentality at all times. You can't let one or two things linger, for the rest of your game. And he said, 2 years ago, that would impact my game quite a bit. Now I've kind of, obviously at times you're still going to be human, but for the most part, he makes a great play, same guy. Makes a terrible play, same guy. Knows that, okay, something goes wrong offensively, turnover, whatever it is, hey, can't compound that mistake. Got to get back on defense. Um, his game overall is, really intriguing to see. He's a guy that, Will Dawkins said his prime might not be for another 5, 6, 7 years, just traditionally based on age for, this kind of upper 20s kind of guys. But his defense is already, pretty darn good. He's already taking on the defensive matchups of, the best or second best or third best kind of players in the league on any given team, any given night. He spent time yesterday guarding Tyrese Maxey at times, guarding Joel Embiid, where, he picked his pocket in the backcourt and, had himself an easy dunk. Offensively, it's going to take some time. I think he's probably surprised himself a little bit with how good of a, mainly corner 3-point shooter he has been so far. I think he's understanding that, hey, I have long strides. Whenever there's a lane to the basket, I might as well go and be aggressive and be in attack mode. It's truly been, fun to watch just these 20 games. You can see the progress that he's made. And he has that mentality of, hey, I'm going to get better every single day. And you stack that up over, a sequence of days, and you can see the improvement. Just in these first 20 games, in the next 20 games, you'll see more improvement. Then in the second half of the season, the last 40 games of the season, you'll see another step. He's hungry, he's working. Really seems like the Wizards have, gotten a slam dunk of a draft pick in the first round for the first time in, arguably a decade. They got, Bradley Beal, I want to say in the 2013 or 14 draft, and, John Wall a couple years before that. But this guy is certainly the limit for Bilal.
No, I love it. I think that you mentioned long-term view and thinking about the future and thinking about, and not just now, but 5, 6 years down the road. He's a guy, obviously, that you have to think about that more so than anybody in maybe the NBA, because Washington, they're probably not going to be in position to compete over the course of the next couple of years. And so with him, he's got to have a short-term memory in a lot of these cases, because there are going to be some losses and he's probably going to get frustrated. But as he continues to progress, maybe he can help the turnaround in that entire process. So should be interesting to track. Last thing I have for you, give me some positives, or maybe one thing that you would like to see over the course of this next 6 weeks that we don't talk. One thing that you want to see that would encourage you during this stretch.
Yeah, obviously I think, it all comes back to Jordan Poole, whether he is a guy that is going to be here, 2 years from now or, 1 or 5 years from now. In the NBA, it's all a business. It's all about, the stock of your players and the assets you have in front of you. They are going to try and rebuild, his value. If he can, turn into a more efficient scoring player, the defense is probably not really going to ever be there. But if you can be more efficient like he was yesterday, I think 23 points on 10 of 15 shooting, instead of those, 25 shot attempt games and he's not even cracking 20 points, that's going to go a long way, because at the end of the day, there's always going to need to be a guy who can score the ball, in critical situations in the NBA. And that's going to be attractive to a lot of contending teams, 1 year, 2 years down the line. For the Wizards in general, to try and help accelerate this rebuild, they didn't get a whole lot of, draft assets for Bradley Beal or Kristaps Porzingis. So, whether Poole is here long term or, is potentially going to get flipped, I wouldn't say it's this year at all. I know that was a wild misquote of Mark Stein that went crazy on Twitter, but it won't be this year. But, if you can build his stock back up and by the end of the season, maybe in the offseason you entertain something, more probably another year into his contract to try and get it a little bit more team friendly in that regard. But hopefully he can, demonstrate not only to himself, because he is putting in the work, and that's one thing he says all the time, can't worry about outside noise. I got to worry about the people around me and the people that know, what I'm putting into things. And certainly, everybody who's around him says, yes, great hard worker, wants to improve, doesn't want to be, in this rut that he was to start the season. So I'll be certainly excited to see these next 20 games, how he can improve. And then certainly by the second half of the season, it'll be interesting to see just how much this roster is different, because there are certainly a lot of veterans on expiring deals that likely, get moved out to, free up more playing time for the younger guys on this team.
Well, we will see what happens. He is Neil Dalal of Hoop District, covering the Washington Wizards for Hoop District and Sports Rabbi. Neil, thank you so much for taking the time with me, man. Want to talk in 6 weeks?
Absolutely.